So the title of our paper is Health and Urban Climate Planning. This is a report on city-based U.S. adaptation policy. My name is Allison Kenner, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Politics and the Center for Science, Technology, and Society at Drexel University in Philadelphia.
My name is Carrie Yandrich. I'm the current climate change project specialist for Delaware's Departments of Natural Resources and Environmental Control and the Division of Energy and Climate.
And this paper is a working paper, so our analysis is still in progress. But the paper actually started with a final project that Carrie submitted for a graduate seminar that I taught a year ago called Geographies of Health. And in her project, Carrie did an analysis of urban climate adaptation plans, and she looked at the extent to which they address public health issues. She represented her analysis using a Google map and an Excel spreadsheet that looked at various categories within these adaptation plans. She did a write-up on regionality. And so at the end of the course, I asked her if she wanted to continue this investigation, but extend the analysis to the 100 most populated U.S. metropolitan statistical areas. And so for the last 8 or 9 months, we've been slowly investigating how U.S. cities frame climate change as a public health issue and address it as such in these climate adaptation plans that we've been collecting and archiving. One of the biggest tasks that we've had to undertake during our study is developing an analytic framework and comparative categories for our investigation. We'll talk a little bit about that today. But this was one of the biggest takeaways for me personally, was just seeing the messiness in the field of urban climate change policy. And by that, I mean the great differences and disparities between climate planning documents and the absence of clear best practices for this field of policy. So we started out with 3 broad research questions. What existing and potential public health issues get recognized and addressed in climate change planning documents, if health is addressed at all? And just a bit of a spoiler here, in the category of climate adaptation plans that we investigated and analyzed in this project, public health issues were not addressed very substantively at all. And we think that part of the reason for this is that we looked at citywide adaptation plans rather than at adaptation plans or policy that were coming out of public health departments specifically. Our second question was, to what extent are public health workers at the table in urban climate change planning? And this question really derives from our theoretical framework, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But this question queries whether intersectoral work is happening in climate policy. Intersectoral work is critical for achieving health equity, as well as for public health work that's addressing the impacts of climate change. Our final question, to what extent are regional and local environmental variables brought into approaches to the health impacts of climate change? And this question underscores that climate change impacts are going to hit the ground in local, place-based ways. So localized differences stem from infrastructural factors, community-based dynamics, but also regional and geographic factors. So we wanted to see whether there was evidence in city climate planning of rigorous attention to, for example, in Pennsylvania and Ohio, heat waves versus in Georgia and Virginia, flooding. So do cities attend to regional specificity, or are they wholesale adopting out-of-the-box climate models? And this is actually disguised as a question about data. To what extent do urban climate planning documents draw on local expertise and data to anticipate climate-related health impacts? So 3 frameworks anchor our study design and analysis. The first is the Health in All Policies framework, which was first introduced on the international stage in the late 1970s and is being taken up more widely, especially in European Union countries. The Centers for Disease Control framework, Building Resilience Against Climate Effects, which is very much a roadmap for public health departments who are anticipating and preparing for local climate change impacts. And then finally, the U.S. Global Change Research Program's Climate and Health Assessment for the United States, which was just published in April 2016. This report identifies a number of key areas where public health will be impacted, including temperature-related illness and death, vector-borne diseases, air pollution and respiratory health, and food security, among others. Elements from the Health and All Policies literature, CDC's BRACE, and this recent report on climate and health were used to structure our own analytic framework. So we developed a 5-point framework to query the selected adaptation plans, and these include intersectoral engagement between public health and non-health agencies, data analysis that speaks to health impacts, funding or organizational commitments to address health, attention to vulnerabilities that stem from existing inequalities, and finally, community involvement in the creation of the plan or its follow-up work. And these 5 points came up over and over again across the Health and All Policies literature, but were also key elements in BRACE as well as the Climate and Health Assessment, albeit in different ways. So we're about to submit a paper that reviews this literature and develops this framework, but if anyone would like a reference, would like the references that we're using, I'm happy to provide those via email.
For the first part of our study, we performed the place-based analysis of climate change planning documents developed by United States' biggest cities. The nation's 100 most populated metropolitan areas, according to the United States Census Bureau, were analyzed. Any cities that are in United States territories were omitted. We created a framework that identified 7 different types of planning documents across cities. The documents that were included in our analysis had to focus on climate change specifically, rather than more comprehensive documents that were about greening, sustainability, or even resilience. The types of planning documents will be discussed in a later slide. By looking at this data, we were more easily able to understand which cities and regions of the nation are taking climate change seriously. We didn't perform an in-depth analysis of every planning document produced by each city. Documents were analyzed to the point at which we were able to determine which of the 7 planning document types it best fell into. While it would be ideal to have a comprehensive list of all planning documents developed by each of these 100 cities, the amount of data available from these cities is so immense that it's almost impossible to find every planning document that relates to climate change. As part of our analysis, we categorized each city into a region. Regions were determined by using the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's Climate Centers map. The map divides the country's states into 7 regions: Northeast, Southeast, Southern, Midwestern, High Plains, and Western. We determined how many cities had robust adaptation plans. By robust, we mean more than one climate change impact was addressed in the form of adaptation strategies. Of the 100 cities, 7 of the 10 northeastern cities, 4 of the 16 southeastern cities, 7 of the 15 midwestern cities, 12 of the 34 western cities, 1 of the 5 High Plains cities, and 2 of the 20 southern cities had robust adaptation plans. In all, 33 of the nation's 100 most populated cities had robust adaptation plans. As previously mentioned, there are 7 types of plans we're looking for from each of these 100 cities as part of the analysis. The abbreviations and parentheses that are seen in this slide will be relevant for the next. A mitigation plan only or overwhelmingly outlines strategies for mitigation. Similarly, an adaptation plan only or overwhelmingly outlines strategies for adaptation. A mitigation and adaptation plan outlines strategies for both. A specific mitigation plan is not citywide and or targets one source of mitigation, such as one that is focused on the transportation sector. A specific adaptation plan also is not citywide and or targets one impact of climate change, such as one that focuses on urban heat. Sustainability plans were not always driven or organized around climate change and its impacts. They almost always had emission reduction strategies and sometimes had adaptation strategies. Despite this, they were not considered a mitigation, an adaptation, or a mitigation and adaptation plan. This is because these plans went beyond climate change solely and offered strategies for conserving our natural resources and environment, such as keeping our water and air clean. Comprehensive plans also generally were not climate change driven. The plans address the overall goals of the city, from the environment to crime to transportation. While the environment section may mention climate change and strategies to mitigate or adapt to it, again, it is not the driver for the development of this document. In order to find these documents, we use Google, Georgetown Climate Center's local adaptation plans website, and the website for the city's sustainability office if it had one. Official city documents were included in this analysis, or at least documents that were specifically prepared for the city by a third party, such as the Environmental Protection Agency. White papers were not included in this analysis. To give you a better idea of how our analysis turned out, here's a graph of some of our findings. The abbreviations seen in the last slide are demonstrated here. While the analysis of the 100 cities were place-based, we wanted to more critically analyze the content of the adaptation plans, more specifically how they address health and vulnerable populations. Thus, we took a closer look at 25 plans that included adaptation strategies and extracted common themes. The map shows those 25 plans that we took a closer look at. Since we looked at those plans that addressed adaptation, there are 3 types of plans demonstrated here. The different colored markers indicate a different plan type. Red indicates we looked at the city's adaptation plan. Purple indicates that we looked at the city's mitigation and adaptation plan. And green indicates that we looked at the city's sustainability plan. We took it a step further and performed an in-depth analysis of 3 plans, including Philadelphia's Growing Stronger Towards a Climate-Ready Philadelphia, published in 2015, the City and County of Denver Climate Adaptation Plan, published in 2014, Cleveland's Climate Action Plan, Building Thriving and Healthy Neighborhoods, published in 2013.
So we chose to highlight these 3 cities because they did the best job of performing and addressing the 5 elements that we developed in our own analytic framework. Intersectoral engagement between public health and non-health agencies, data analysis that speaks to public health impacts, funding or organizational commitments to address health, attention to vulnerabilities that stem from existing inequalities, and community involvement in the creation of the plan and its follow-up work. And we're not going to go into our in-depth analysis here today, but just give you a sense of the kinds of things that we're looking at. So first, Growing Stronger Toward a Climate-Ready Philadelphia. This plan clearly performed a high degree of intersectoral engagement. So there was 10 municipal departments, including the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, at the table helping to draft this plan. The plan showed how different municipal activities overlap, how they impact other departments, and exhibited opportunities for co-benefits and no-risk actions across the departments. The document also identified and detailed future planning stages as well as efforts to create a citywide adaptation plan that would include community input later on down the road. So this particular plan was really focused on all the municipal departments in the city and the relationships between them. We also selected the Philadelphia plan specifically because it called attention to existing inequalities, population groups at risk, and associated vulnerabilities. And it did so in a way that was more substantive than other adaptation plans. This was paralleled by some public health data on vulnerabilities, but where the Growing Stronger plan really excelled was in providing climate data that shows or reflects impacts to public health. And that was associated with our reading of the U.S. Global Change Research Program's Climate and Health Assessment Report. So like Philadelphia, Cleveland had strong evidence for intersectoral work in its planning document, as well as clearly outlined plans for future work that would implement the activities described in the plan. The Cleveland plan, however, did not address health inequalities like poverty to the extent that Philadelphia and even Denver did. The Cleveland Plan invoked the cultures of health language and often drew connections between policy, infrastructure, and quality of life. But this was often done in a cursory way without health data to support the discursive gestures. So there was a clear kind of sense from the Cleveland Plan of the relationship between, or at least acknowledgement that all policies impact health. But this brings us to a point that we realized as we were comparing these different city adaptation plans side by side. Some plans were clearly action-oriented policy documents with a lot of data. These were like the adaptation plans, for example. Others were more geared toward public communication of government efforts and activities, and usually those were ones that fell into the action plan category, as you see here with Cleveland. This brings us to our final planning document, the City and County of Denver's Climate Adaptation Plan. So like Philadelphia and Cleveland, Denver's plan exhibits intersectoral engagement, although the plan was drafted and led by the Department of Environmental Health specifically. In addition to evidence of intersectoral engagement, there was strong attention to vulnerable populations, inequalities, and looking at how climate change would exacerbate these dynamics. The plan also drew in local and regional climate data and models to talk about public health impacts, which BRACE and the U.S. Global Change Research Program's report indicate is crucial for robust public health planning. So just some conclusions. To frame this in relation to the world in 2050, we want to emphasize the local unfolding of climate impacts. As we've read often through the course of our study, cities and local governments will be first responders. So local climate adaptation work is hugely important. We also want to emphasize that inequality and vulnerability is cumulative. Between now and 2050, we need to address existing inequalities and vulnerabilities so that these are not compounded and exacerbated by adaptive infrastructure and policy that are being enacted today. And finally, we want to acknowledge a foundational premise of public health. Policies and infrastructures that don't fall under the domain of or purview of public health departments or public health work still impacts community health. So just to end with a quote by Jason Corburn and colleagues writing on health and all policies in Richmond, California, most public health policies have the potential to influence health and health equity, either positively or negatively, but policymakers outside of the health sector may not be routinely considering the health consequences of their choices and thereby missing opportunities to advance health and prevent disease and unnecessary suffering. We want to thank the organizers of the World in 2050. Please contact me via email at ali.kenner, KENNER, @gmail.com if you have any questions.